So, my name is Lulu Freistadt, and the reason why I started Smart Elections with some acquaintances colleagues that I had worked with for years was because I was an election security journalist for about 10 years, and I covered a lot of things that were very concerning to me in terms of the way that our elections work. And I went to DEF CON 3 times, which is a big hacker conference, and I saw there how voting machines could be accessed and taken control of. And the security experts there did not feel that the security on most of the voting machines was adequate. In fact, sometimes it was downright non-existent. And so I covered those issues for about 10 years. I did video investigations that received 4 million views online, but eventually I came to believe that what was really more important than just covering issues was actually organizing the public to get involved in elections and to really improve our elections at the grassroots level, as well as at at the state and federal level in terms of legislation. So that's what I do now. We started Smart Elections about 5 years ago, and we've done a lot in that time. Um, I don't even want to take the time to tell you all the things that we've done, but one of the things that we've done is we've done 5 pilot programs to do this poll watching, and we've developed techniques that we think are helpful and fairly easy to do so that you can both protect and monitor the election results in your local county. And there's 2 things that we focus on. One, we like to check that the number of people who sign into the poll book matches the number of ballots that are scanned. And the reason why we do that is one, because it's a fairly simple check to do, actually. You do have to have access to the equipment. So you do have to be a poll watcher with a certificate here in New York State. But once you have that access, you can see the numbers on the poll books, you can see who signed in, you can count those up in your spreadsheets, and you can see the numbers on the scanners and you can count those up. And it's really just math, you know. We want to see that it reconciles. And I've been doing this for years. And one of the things that we found is that in places where that basic reconciliation does not match, we find other problems, other issues. And so it's a good basic check in and of itself. And it's also a kind of a red flag if, in fact, the numbers aren't adding up to say, hey, maybe there's some administrative problems in this location, or maybe there's other issues that we would want to know about. And just being in the polling place, a lot of really good things happen. One, you develop relationships with the poll workers and the election inspectors. Hopefully, those are friendly, positive relationships, because as you get to know your election officials better, then we can have a good relationship with them. And if there are improvements that we want, we're more likely to get them. So we always try to be positive. We always try to be professional. And if there are things that we're concerned about, we don't like make a huge scene. We don't throw a temper tantrum. We try to be polite and professional, take notes, and consult back with our team if we think that there are issues. So when we go through this, I'm hoping that everybody here is interested in becoming a poll watcher. In the upcoming primary, I have the dates for you. There's both early voting and election day voting, and there's also logic and accuracy testing ahead of time that you might be interested in watching, and auditing afterwards that I think is really fascinating and important. And we've really been encouraging people to also observe the audit. The audits, unfortunately, we don't feel are being done as well as they are supposed to be done. And um, that's an ongoing frustration. So one of the things about observing the audit is that we do find out kind of how different counties are different. Paul's on the call. I saw him, Paul Auer. He observed the audit and also was a poll observer in Ulster County. I think was it last year or the year before, Paul?
It was a year before.
Year before. He had a really great experience there. We found that the Ulster County election officials were very efficient, friendly, transparent. They allowed him to observe uh, really pretty much anything that he asked to observe. And he came away with a high level of confidence about how the elections are being held there in Ulster County. I live in Kings County in Brooklyn, and I had just the opposite experience. When I've gone to observe, sometimes I found polling stations that seem to have radically incorrect numbers of ballots. And then when I've gone to the audit, they're not following the statutes. They don't let us observe. They keep us behind a chain link fence 14 feet away. They don't give us the documents they're legally required to give us sometimes. In fact, most of the time. This year was the first time in 3 years that they gave us the documents they were legally required to give us. And I think only because they suspected we would file a lawsuit if they didn't. So this is just to say that there's a really wide spectrum of compliance and efficiency and administrative capability among different counties. And even within a county, among different officials, you may find a difference. So you don't want to go in with a negative attitude, thinking like, oh, they don't know what they're doing. You want to go in with a positive attitude, hope for the best. And then as we, get to know our election officials better, we'll find out what the level of competence and what the level of transparency is. And as I said, if there are problems, then we're going to take notes and come back and consult our teams. So, what I want to do to start with, I think the best thing is th- I want to make sure that this seems very simple. Um, it's going to seem a little bit complicated when we get like what they call in the weeds, when you really have to start figuring out, what numbers are you looking at and how does the spreadsheet work and stuff like that. I see someone, Denise, is having trouble getting connected. Denise, you want to try logging out, logging back in? Sometimes that helps. So, also, you could try your mobile if you're having trouble with your desktop. That's another solution there. So, I'm going to give an overview of kind of the election process and what we're trying to check. And then I'm going to start talking about forms and things like that. Um, so, there's really kind of about four different areas of the election that you might want to check to make sure that the results are accurate, that they're inclusive, that people who are eligible are getting to vote, and that people who are not eligible are not voting, and checking that the results are being tabulated accurately and then being sent up to the websites and the media outlets accurately. So one check is not going to check everything. We don't have one silver bullet procedure that checks everything and says, hey, the elections are perfect. There are a series of checks that can be done, and we're not going to be able to do all of them. Each of us is kind of like one person. But the idea is that if we get more and more people involved in this, gradually there'll be more people, and different people will be able to check different parts of the process. And eventually we will have a really somewhat seamless process where we can check each different kind of pivot point in the election, or each different possible vulnerability. So I'm going to just kind of describe those four areas. So, one is what we call the front end. I usually divide these into like the front end, the middle end, and the back end of voting. The front end is really what I would say a lot of progressives focus on in terms of getting people to the polls and making sure that the process is inclusive, and that people that are eligible to vote don't experience voter suppression, that they don't experience long lines, that their polling locations aren't moved, that they're not intimidated. All of that is part of the front end of voting. And then I think for conservatives, they tend to focus on whether or not people are voting who are not eligible to vote. So there's a lot of kind of like political tension in that front end of voting. We are nonpartisan. We work with people across the political spectrum, and we're interested in fair elections. The adjectives that we focus on are fair, secure, accurate, inclusive, accessible, well administered, and publicly verifiable. And what we found is that there are many people across the political spectrum who all agree that if our elections were run in that way, we would all feel much more confident in them. So we don't think this is an issue of politics. We try to follow the law and the statutes in any given area, in any given county or state. And we also really work toward transparency. What we want is for our elections to be run in a way that we, the public, have confidence that we understand the elections and that we can see that they are being conducted correctly and accurately and securely. So we really focus a lot on transparency and following the law, and not on one political perspective or the other. And I'm going to encourage you, there's kind of two main rules in our meetings, one rule is that we don't talk about politics, and that's because we have people from across the political spectrum. And what we find is that if we focus on what we agree on, which is the elections need to be well run, and we don't talk about politics, we all get along really well and we can collaborate and get our work done. So we don't talk about politics, and we do always try to be respectful. We don't talk over each other. We don't talk at the same time. We don't argue with each other. We're always respectful on this call. And if we do those two things, we find that things go really well. So there's the front end of voting. Then there's what I call the middle end. And the middle end is kind of like when we vote. In the US, we vote mostly on voting machines. And so the middle end is the voter coming into the polling location, marking their ballot, either with a pen and paper or with a ballot marking device. Usually that ballot then is either scanned, or if it's an affidavit ballot, it might be put into an envelope. If that person is an absentee voter, then they're going to be doing this, filling out the ballot at home, and it's going to be going through the mail. And then that middle end also includes the ballot getting scanned often. So you have a technology involved there. Often you also have people signing into the electronic poll books. That's another piece of technology that's kind of in the middle end of voting. And then those votes also get put onto flash drives as the ballot scanners tabulate them. There are flash drives which are very similar to kind of like the flash drive that you put into your computer, just like to copy your photos onto. They're sticks, media sticks. That's where we keep the votes for the most part, on those flash drives. So those are part of the middle end of voting. And then the voting machines print out poll tapes, which I'm going to show you a picture of. And those poll tapes are our most accurate reflection of the votes that that machine has totaled up at that moment at the end of election day. Those poll tapes are very important, and we usually try to photograph them if we can, because that helps us check between the middle end and then what I call the back end of voting, which is something that I think remains quite a mystery to many of us, because it's something that we never really see that process. But the votes go on those flash drives. Usually they're sealed at the end of election day. In New York City, they're in these pink Ziploc bags with seals on them. And then the results usually get modemed actually down to the central headquarters. And then the flash drives themselves, there's two in New York. Usually there's a one that stays in the machine and one that goes down to the Board of Elections. So usually there's redundant. They're mirror images of each other. In case something happens to one, the other one is still there with the results. So those flash drives have to get either the results are either transmitted electronically and or well, usually both, and actually taken down to the Board of Elections, usually by a police officer. And then those flash drives, the content gets pulled into computers, it gets aggregated, it goes into the election management system, and then up into the, web pages like on the county websites, on the state website, and to the media as well. And that's how we get the election results that are like on our TV. That's all part of the back end, those votes moving electronically through multiple phases and multiple computers. And so there's different things that we try to set up to check like the different pressure points of this system. So in terms of the front end, checking whether or not somebody is eligible to vote or whether somebody eligible is being prevented from voting, that's something that we have not spent a lot of time on in this organization because there are so many other organizations working on that, and I'm sure you know them. If you're involved in this work, you're probably pretty familiar with that part of it. There isn't as much focus on the middle and the back end, and so that is what we focus on. So the test that we do of checking whether or not the number of voters who have signed into the electronic poll books matches the number of ballots that have been scanned is just a basic reconciliation to see if the scanners seem to be correlated to the number of voters. It doesn't tell us if the scanners are scanning correctly. That we have to do an audit for, but it does tell us if there's some sort of mismanagement at that particular location, or if there's some sort of problem. If I have been to a location, and I will show you the paperwork for this, where there were almost 700 more ballots scanned than voters who had signed in. And we never got an explanation for that. We don't know why that was, but it's concerning. You can sometimes have fewer ballots than voters. That happens. They call it a fleeing voter. It means like you go to the polls and you sign in and you get your ballot, and then, your kid calls from school and there's been some sort of emergency and you have to go and pick them up, and you just forget about your ballot and you just leave it lying there and you run out the door. So then you signed into the electronic poll books, but you never scanned your ballot. So you might have more voters than ballots scanned. In fact, that's somewhat normal, a few. But you never, never, never want to have more ballots scanned than voters, because why? Where would those ballots come from? You should never have more ballots scanned than voters. So this reconciliation is just a basic reconciliation to see if the poll site seems to be being administered in an efficient and um, in an efficient way, and in a way that is is legal, that actually corresponds to what we're expecting. If you want to check that the scanner itself is counting correctly, then you need to attend the audit, because the audit is where you check the other part of the middle end. The audit is where you check if the machine is working correctly, because generally they take some ballots, usually 3%, and they count them either by hand or with another machine, and they see if they get the same result. And that is the check that we do to see if the scanners are working correctly. And then there is another check that we do to see if the information has traveled correctly. Do you remember I talked about how the information goes from the voting machines onto the flash drives, onto the election management system, and up into the websites? Okay, so in order to check that part of the process, that is why we look at the poll tapes, because the poll tapes get printed out there in the polling location at the end of election night, and we photograph them, we photograph the results, and then we compare them to the results that get posted on the county website. And if there's a change, if somehow there's more votes or less votes when the votes get posted on the county website, then we can say there's a problem here. And I'll show you examples of that. It's not it's not common, but it does happen. And in that case, usually votes have definitely either been lost or added. Often it's lost. Usually it's because, well, it depends. Sometimes it's because of malfunctioning machines or corruption. Sometimes it's because, like, a flash drive might get lost. So if they lose a flash drive, then the results that are there recorded at the polling location that night might not get translated up onto the website. And it does happen. Sometimes there'll be, this is a type of situation that they had in Georgia during the recount in 2020. It was not about votes being counted incorrectly. It was just votes being lost because of poor administration. They would have an early voting site, and um, the flash drive got filled up, and then they took that flash drive and they put it in a drawer and put a new flash drive in, and they forgot. They just forgot. And there was thousands, about 3,000 votes on that flash drive. And so later when they did the recount, the hand recount in Georgia, they found that flash drive, and they actually, among about 5 different counties in Georgia, when they did the recount, they found about 6,000 new votes. And the margin of victory in that race was 11,000 votes, for those of you who followed it. So to find 6,000 votes later in a race won by 11,000 votes is quite discouraging. We were very discouraged about the way that election was held. But it's not the concern that you normally hear, that it was rigged or anything like that. This is really a lot of just often about poor administration, and keeping in mind that election officials are overworked, underpaid, understaffed, and under-resourced. And I think it's really important for us to have compassion for our election officials. They have to do a lot of different things, and especially election day here in New York is about 17-hour day. I think they start in there about 5 in the morning. The polls open at 6, the polls close at 9 p.m., and then they don't get out of there until about 10 p.m. That's a very, very long day, and it is not unusual that people make mistakes when they're working a 17-hour day where they had to get up at 5 in the morning and probably didn't get much sleep to begin with. So it's important also to come to this again, saying these are human beings and they're probably doing the best they can, and maybe they do make mistakes, but not to jump to conclusions that everything is rigged, or that, there's some sort of huge problem. Sometimes it's, an isolated issue, and it's just an issue of poor administration. I'm not saying that I don't have my concerns about corruption in the New York system. I do believe that there is a fair amount of corruption, or I would not be doing this. But we always have to be really careful that we don't jump to conclusions and that we give people the benefit of the doubt. Okay, so that's kind of an overview. I'm gonna spend about 5 minutes now and take questions, and then 5 or 10 minutes, not too much, and then we're gonna move into the actual documentation and how this whole process works. So I'm gonna unmute everybody, and you can raise your hand, either a digital hand or a real hand, or if you don't have hands, you can bang your head around and indicate that you want to say something. Um, I think this is a time for people to speak up. If you have any questions, um, now's the time. Trying to find the participants to unmute. Participants. Okay. I think just try to unmute yourself if you need to unmute. Do we have any questions? Raise your hand.
Right.
Mark, did you have questions? Oh, Walt, go ahead. Hi, great to have you here.
Did you have the hand up?
Hi. Um, you say you've been doing this for years. And, um, how often during the day do you compare all those numbers?
So the most important time is if you don't have much time, go at the end of the night. That's the most important time for the numbers to reconcile, is at the end of the night. If you have time, it's really great to go first thing in the morning before the polls open. So get there at about 5:30 and check that all the machines are supposed to be at zero. All the poll books
Yeah.
are supposed to be at zero.
Mhm.
I've never been there early when it hasn't been at zero, but it's always a good thing to check. And you can do a midday check too. So you can do, if you have time, you can do an early morning, a midday, and an evening. Or what you can also do is you can check like, half a dozen polling locations. You could do one in the morning and midday. You could do, maybe a couple at the end of the night. It's hard to do more than one or two at the end of the night because the end of the night is very stressful. And this one of the things that I'm going to talk to you about is kind of navigating your election officials and your poll workers. They are tired, they are stressed out, sometimes they are hostile and rude. You have to stay calm and be polite and work around them. At the end of the night, especially, they are tired and they're trying to get out of there, and you are a pain in their butt. But you have a right to be there and you have a right to get your data. So I'm always just polite but firm. I have, these are the numbers that we need. Whenever, you're ready with your poll books as you're closing them down, please make sure that I get the numbers before you close the poll books, and please make sure I get the numbers before you close out the scanners. That's all I ask. And then please, do post the poll tapes. So it's really as much as you have the bandwidth for. Mark?
Where do we get the credentials to sign our poll watcher certificate for the presidential primary coming up and then the June 25th primary? I mean, it's easier on the November election because we can get one of the candidates. Where are we going to get the other ones?
We're going to have to get candidates or political parties for this one. For the past few years, there's always been a referendum on the ballot, and we formed a political action committee. And as the political action committee, that has allowed us to give certificates ourselves. We Smart Legislation, our PAC, it's called Confidence, gave certificates out for the for early voting, for election day, for the auditing. So it's been great, but there's no referendum on this primary. And so it's going to have to be a candidate or a political party, but we are going to help you. I think that some of the team here put together a spreadsheet that has everybody's name, email, phone number, and county. And as soon as we know which counties we need certificates in, we will reach out to political parties. A lot of times we work with a third party candidate to get those certificates because the mainstream candidates often have their own poll watchers and they often won't give certificates, but an independent candidate often is very is very glad to have the help. So we're going to work with you to get those, Mark. Linda?
Yes. So there's been a lot of conversation about the machines are not hooked up to the internet. I think everyone's maybe aware of this. So one of my big questions is, and what I've heard and read about are these things called algorithms that can be programmed into the machines. Is that something you think about or aware about, or anything we can do about?
I do think about algorithms. I mean, doesn't an algorithm is just a program, like it's a pattern. An algorithm is a pattern, and then
Mhm.
you might see the pattern like in election results. There might be a lot of reasons why you see a pattern in election results. It might be because of the demographics of that county. You know, it might be because of the racial and political makeup of the county, and the votes are coming in a certain way. You know, if you say there's a lot more early votes on the Democrat side and then the Republican side, that's, you know, a pattern, but there's a reason for that pattern. It's probably because the Democrats have embraced early voting and the Republicans have not. So an algorithm, it's used kind of to say like there's a horrible pattern here, or like there's a clear indication of manipulation because we see that these votes are not following in a random order. They seem to have a pattern. I have done actually fairly extensive work working with statisticians to look at algorithms, and I do have concerns about it. The check that we're doing right now is not a check for that. As I said, there are a lot of different checks that you can do. In general, people look at algorithms by doing statistical analysis after the election. They look at the way the votes are coming in and to see if there's a pattern in those votes. Or sometimes I know with the voter rolls in New York, there's a gentleman who's been doing a lot of research and believes that he's found algorithms in the voter rolls. So that is not the check that we are doing. I am concerned about it, but I don't have an answer for you about what to do about that.
And are they hooked up to the internet? That was the other question.
In New York, the voting machines are not supposed to be connected to the internet. There are no modems on these voting machines. The modem is usually the way that they connect a voting machine to the internet. Like in Florida, they actually have modems built into their voting machines, and they deliberately connect them to the internet so they can send their results back to home base. But it's a terrible idea. So here in New York, our voting machines are legally required to be disconnected from the internet. It's called air gapped. They are never supposed to be connected to the internet. And even the ballots that the are prepared by the election officials are supposed to be prepared on air gapped computers that are not connected to the internet. So maybe they get that information and they put it on like a disk and they put that disk in, but they don't pull it like off off of the web. So I was at Project Civica last night, and I know one of the gentlemen on that call said that he believes that the New York voting machines are connected to the internet. If if someone is finding that, he has a piece of equipment that he believes is showing him a Wi-Fi signal. Just because there's a Wi-Fi signal in the room doesn't mean that the voting machine is connected to the internet. You are going to have a Wi-Fi signal in that room because the electronic poll books are definitely connected to the internet. They are intended to be connected to the internet. They cannot function unless they're connected to the internet. So that is how those electronic poll books, that's how they make sure that people don't vote twice, is because the electronic poll books are connected to the internet. They're all connected to each other. So if you, Linda, vote at your polling location during early voting, you can't the next day go to, the polling location on the other side of town because the electronic poll books are connected and the poll book over there knows that you voted at your first location. So they are connected. They do have what's called a cradle point. That's one of the things that we usually check, that the cradle point is on. It's like a little blue light, and you want to make sure that that blue light is on, because if the electronic poll books are not connecting properly, you will have a bunch of problems. That you'll get long lines, that the numbers won't come out right, they'll print out the wrong ballots. Like, you want to make sure that that electronic poll book is connected to the internet, because otherwise it cannot function properly. But the voting machines themselves are not supposed to be connected to the internet, and I haven't personally seen any evidence that they are. If you have evidence that the voting machines in New York are connected to the internet, please send it to me. I'll put my email in the chat. Wait, I think I'm being screen bombed. I'm not sure.
What happened?
Uh-uh.
Somebody put the whiteboard on briefly.
Okay. So, as long as we just don't get Zoom bombed with unpleasant images, that's a thing that I really don't. Linda, did that answer your question?
Pretty well, yeah.
All right, Deborah?
Hello. Okay. Two questions. So when we are at the poll sites, and can we at any time that there is basically downtime, we can check the poll book count to the machine counts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, I wouldn't do it constantly. You'll drive them crazy.
Right, right,
But I
no,
would
but
I would do it at most 3 times in any given location, usually at the top of the day, either before they open or very close to opening, sometime in the middle, and at the end of the day. I would not go more than that.
Okay, all right. So that basically answered my second question. So they don't have a problem with me going in and checking something, watching for a little while, leaving, and then coming back. You know, I don't have to stay there, you know, for a couple hours at a time. They would be okay with me leaving, coming back.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can. You just a small point here, and this is in the paperwork that I'm going to give you. You cannot sit down. In New York State, as a poll worker, you cannot sit down. If they ask you and invite you to sit down, just say, I'm not allowed to sit down. Thank you. It's just one of the weird rules about
Poll watcher, right?
poll
watcher.
watchers not allowed to sit down. I think the idea
Okay.
is that you're not supposed to camp out there. You're supposed to be there observing actively and then move on. Mark,
Thank you.
thank you. Mark, your hands up. Did you have a question?
Could you provide us the New York State laws?
Yes,
on
I'm gonna-
poll?
Yeah, I'm going to give you the statutes. Absolutely. That's part of the paperwork I'm going to give you today.
Yes, can you hear me? Is my audio coming through?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Is the
Mark-
audio coming through?
It is coming through, Mark, but I'm not sure you're hearing me. I answered your question. Yes, we're going to provide you with the statutes.
Okay, your end's breaking up, but can you provide? You can provide us with that so we know what we can legally do and
Yep.
and make sure we don't
We're going to go over the statutes
violate
tonight.
any
Yep.
state election law when we're poll observing.
Yes, we're going to go over the statutes tonight.
Okay.
Holly?
Hi. Okay, I have two questions. One is silly. The poll books may be connected within towns, but are they connected within counties or between counties? So
No.
like it's okay, they're not. So
No.
somebody could vote here in Broome and in Westchester. Okay.
In
Second-
theory, yeah, if they're registered in both places, they could.
I am. Okay. Not my choice, but anyway. So the second question is what type of location do you think would be smartest for us to observe? The convenient one or the largest one?
I would go for the largest one.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, if you think about it, if there is foul play, you don't conduct foul play at a polling location where there's 10 votes because you don't you're not going to get any bang for your buck there, right? So
Right.
if you're going to engage in foul play, it's going to be at a large polling station.
Okay, cool.
Great question. Paul?
Thank you.
There are various details. I hope that this document that you will send us will permit to inform the people at the who conduct the voting that what we are allowed to do and what we are not allowed to do. When I was visiting these poll stations, there was some confusion about it. I was fortunate that somebody from the outside who was an official informed them that what I was doing is okay. The taking the picture of the poll tape, that was also a little bit difficult because it came at the very end of the session. And as you pointed out, people were tired and they wanted to go home. You may need somebody to help you to take this picture. And there's a question is what part of the poll tape should you take pictures of?
Those are great questions, Paul. So when we get into the poll tapes, we'll talk about that. Poll tapes are these really long cash register receipt type tapes. And the easiest is to take a video of the whole tape. There's even an app that helps you do that from a company called Democracy Counts. So I would recommend that people get that app and use it. It's actually great to work in collaboration with them because you send the poll tape directly to them and they analyze the poll tapes. And they also keep track of them and keep them organized. So we can talk about Democracy Counts when we get into the poll tape section, but you can also just photograph them yourself if you're not into dealing with an app. So those are great questions, Paul. I am going to be giving you paperwork. And what Paul's pointing out here is that there have not been really active poll watchers in New York for a long time. I think our organization is one of the first that has really tried to get poll watching throughout the state. And as I said, this is our, we did 5 pilot projects since 2021. And our goal is to eventually have poll watchers in every county across the state, every election. We think it's really part of the process. It is written into the New York law, and it's a shame that people haven't been doing it because you learn so much when you do it. You're there, you're observing. If you're just quiet and respectful and listen, you learn so much about how the elections work, about problems, and also about how people overcome them. One of the polling stations that I went to, when I had gotten there at about 6 in the morning, right when they were opening up, and the janitor at the school had come in and he had found the whole place like with no electricity whatsoever when he got there. Nothing was working. And in that hour before the polls opened, he had gone and figured out what was wrong with their electrical fuse box or their grid, and he was ingeniously got that back online so that the polling station opened on time. And a lot of times that's what our elections are. They're individuals creatively trying to figure out how to get things to work. They don't always have a lot of support. So when you're there, you may develop a good deal of respect for the election workers. You'll also encounter people who are rude and mean even. Just like any, batch of humans, there's always good and bad apples. But one of the things that Paul brought up is that there is often kind of a lack of information about poll watchers because we haven't had an active poll watching community. I have gone to polling locations with my certificates and with my paperwork and had a poll inspector there say, well, I have no idea what you're doing or why you're here. I've been an inspector for 10 years and I've never had someone come to poll watch. And then I'm polite and I say, well, we are allowed to poll watch. Here's the statute. Here's my paperwork. Here's my certificate. And usually they go and they make a phone call or something, and then they come back and they're like, okay. And they're usually okay. If your paperwork is not in order, then they sometimes will kick you out. So that's one of the reasons that it's so important to get the right paperwork. New York has these really kind of arcane paperwork laws. You have to have a certificate basically for every single election district at the location. And sometimes, especially for early voting, they might have 20 locations. They might have like 20 election districts packed into that location. Sometimes they're okay and they'll let me put all of the election districts on one piece of paper, but most of the time they're sticklers and I have to bring 20 pieces of paper. Each one is the certificate for that district at that polling location, and I give them that little mini novella of paperwork. There was one location where it took 3 times before we got the paperwork right for them. That was in the beginning when we didn't understand all the paperwork so well. And the first 2 times they escorted me out, the police escorted me out, and they would not let me observe. But by the 3rd time, we came back with each district on a separate piece of paper, and they let us observe. And then the inspector was actually very friendly and showed me around and showed me the accessibility ramp and all the things I wanted to see. So paperwork, being correct is very important, and also just politely educating people as we go. Okay, let's get into the paperwork. So I put together some packets and each person will get emailed a packet. And I'm going to show you some of these packets now. We're going to go through them so that you can see kind of what is involved. So I think the first thing that I want to show you is I usually put together this packet called poll watcher total packet. And there are statewide guidelines, and then there are also county guidelines. And the thing to be aware of is that what controls everything ultimately is the statute. The statute for the state is really what determines what poll watchers can and cannot do. But each county has its own individual little rules. I'm going to be showing you the New York City paperwork because the New York City paperwork, in my experience, is the most polished. Other counties may have no paperwork whatsoever about their poll watchers, what they can and can't do, or they may have one or two things. So, but in New York City, they have like a whole poll watcher guideline. So I'm going to show you that. And then when we find out what county each of you are from, then we're going to drill down and make sure that we're following the guidelines of your county. Hopefully, you're going to be introducing yourself to the election officials ahead of time. And we do that so that there's, no big surprises. We say we have this many poll watchers. They're going to be observing on early voting and election day. And we, just want you to be aware of that. Here are our certificates. We do not tell them what polling locations we're going to, because that would defeat the purpose. They will ask you, what polling location do you plan to go to? And the best thing is to say, we still are making our plans. We're not sure. It may depend on the weather or traffic. We're not sure. Just something polite and vague. We don't tell them where we're going. We don't have to. We're legally allowed to go to any polling location in our county. You have to observe in your own county. That is one of the laws. So you can't go buzzing over to another county, stay in your county. But you can pick ahead of time locations that, as we talked about on this call, that you think are probably the busiest. Or if it is better for you just to go to some place that's convenient because you don't have a lot of time and you want to do something, but just the place down the road is most convenient, by all means, go there. That's fine too. Okay, so let's get started. This is a bundle that I put together, and it starts with an example of what your certificate is going to look like. This one is a certificate that we put together from our pack, but yours is going to be from a candidate or a political party. This is the City of New York poll watcher certificates, but usually we've been able to use these across the state with no problem. We just changed this to the Board of Elections for like your particular county. So like if you're in Monroe County, we'll change this to the Board of Elections in Monroe County. We did this for the audits with about, I think, close to about a dozen people last cycle. I know I see Larry on the call. He was one of the people, and we gave him one for Monroe County. And Larry, you didn't have any trouble with your certificate, did you?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so these have been working pretty well. We'll be circling the primary. It'll say primary, and it'll have the 2024 date on it. And then here, this is where if we know the polling locations that we might want to go to, then we'll put those locations. So we'll put as many locations as we might be going to, and then you not necessarily have to go to all of them. In this particular instance, I knew I was going to FDR High School because we had a lot of problems there before. So that was where the 22nd and 37th districts, and there's an election district and an assembly district. So you have to have those numbers correct, and we'll help you figure those out. There's in New York City, it's complicated. There's these huge PDFs that sort out and tell you which is the election district and which is the assembly district. But we'll get this all together. We'll help you get these together. And that's your certificate. And then in this case, I signed this, but in your case, it'll be a candidate or a political party who will be signing it. And then that's what you're going to be taking to the polling location with you. You want to have multiple copies. They are going to keep a copy, and you are going to keep a copy. They always keep a copy of your certificate. So if you're going to multiple locations, you're going to need multiple copies of your certificate because you always want to make sure that you retain one. You might come back multiple times on election, like during early voting, and it might be a different inspector. And you'll say, well, I already gave it to them. They put it on file, but they can't find it. So then, have another copy of it. Have plenty of copies of your certificate. Be able to hand that out. When you first come in, I'm going to go through this with you, what your basic protocols are going to be. We have it all down in this bundle. So When you arrive at the location, politely identify yourself as a poll watcher and ask to see the inspector or the supervisor. Be respectful at all times. Poll workers have a long day and they are doing a helpful job. Give the inspector or supervisor your certificate, sign into the book, begin the process described below in the poll watcher protocols. So always be professional, polite, respectful. If they are rude, if they are mean, bite your tongue, smile. Maybe they're having a bad day. Do not engage in any negative way. You will only get possibly either thrown out or you will get you will earn a bad reputation for our organization. And that is not what we want. Walt?
Sign into the book. What book? Who
They'll,
has the book?
they'll show you. They'll show you. You go and you
Oh, I've been
there's
an inspector and I don't know anything about a book. I did it for 7 or 8 years already.
you did poll watching?
No, I was an inspector and I had no idea where any book was for the poll watchers.
Well, this is what I'm talking about. We haven't really had poll watchers, and so people don't know, but they have a book that people have to sign into. And when you go and identify yourself as a poll worker to the inspector, they will most likely have a book for you to sign in. If they don't worry about it. But usually they do, in my experience. They have a book and you have to sign in. And if you start doing what you're doing without signing in, you'll get in trouble. You're
None
supposed
of
to
the inspectors I worked with knew about any book.
I don't know what to tell you. If there's no book, don't worry about it.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. These are our guidelines. Be polite and respectful at all times. Never touch the equipment, the paperwork, or anything that is part of the official election process. We are observers and are not allowed to touch anything. So even when you are like leaning over and you are getting the information off the electronic poll book, you do not touch it. You ask the poll worker politely to turn the electronic book toward you. You want to make sure that you get the number yourself. Sometimes they will keep the poll book facing them and they will read you the number and say, I'm so sorry, could you please turn it toward me? I'd like to get the number myself, or we're instructed to get the number ourselves. So just, you never touch the equipment. You don't touch the ballots. You don't touch the paper. We are observers. We are not allowed to touch anything. So ask them to turn that electronic poll book toward you and then write down the number. And then that's the same when you go to the scanners. You can look at the scanners. You do not touch them. If I think that's pretty clear. Poll watchers are not allowed to sit down. I mentioned that to you. It's just some weird rule. We're not allowed to sit down. Do not speak to or interfere with voters. I actually had an incident at the last election when I was poll watching at my own polling place. One of my neighbors who lives across the street came up to me and she wanted help with her ballot. She had to use the ballot marking device and she didn't have her glasses and she couldn't see. And she was like, Lulu, can you help me, please? And so I started to help her and I got in a world of trouble. They were like, Lulu, you cannot be helping a voter. You cannot talk to the voters. You cannot, help them vote. We're poll watchers. So do not interfere with the polling process. Poll workers, supervisors, or election inspectors. Ask your questions at a time when they are not busy. Remember to be polite and supportive. They have a long day. So generally what happens, you're going to come in and maybe there's like a little rush going on when you first come in. So don't try to go in there and get your numbers. Just wait until there's a break in the stream of voters. That's why one reason it's good to go at the beginning of the day and the end of the night. If you go like at dinner time, it's going to be a lot harder. So go maybe 2 in the afternoon if you want to go midday. You do not try to get your numbers when it's busy. Do not get in the way of voters. Do not interfere with the process. Just wait until there's a pause and no one is there, like at the table that you're trying to get a number for, and then say, hi, this looks like a good time. Could I just get that number off the electronic poll book, please? And they might say, who are you? What are you? And you'll say, I'm a poll watcher. I'm just here to write down the numbers from the electronic poll book, please. Could you turn it toward me? If you are told you can't do something that is on our list, write it down, write down the name and the job of the person who told you and the reason you were given. If it seems like an important thing, text Lulu at 917-543-2125. So that's pretty clear. If something seems weird, don't make a fuss, write down, take notes, take down the name of the person and let us know, text us or put it in your report afterwards. This is our organization. We are the PAC of the nonpartisan organization Smart Legislation. Our PAC name is Confidence. We strive to be polite and respectful at all times. We always have our poll watcher certificates ready for inspection. Give the certificates to the inspector if they ask for them. Always keep a copy for yourself. We have filed our paperwork with the State Board of Elections. I just checked today that we were up to date. Below is the normal, what our normal process is for polling location. E-poll book. Check the number of voters who have checked in at each poll book table. So these are like kind of times that are good at or just before or after 6 a.m. when it opens, at just before or after 9 p.m. closing. Now, keep in mind at closing, they are hell bent to get out of there. You cannot come at 9 p.m. and think that you're going to get your numbers. They will chew you a new nose. They will be so mad at you. They are tired and grumpy at 9 o'clock. Go at 8:30 or 8:15. Make friends with the inspector. Say, gosh, I'm sure you've had a long day. How's it been? Has it been busy? Chit chat a little bit. And then say, I'm here to poll watch. And I know you're trying to get out of here, but I do need to get my numbers before you close. Make friends with them and just let them know before they close those electronic poll books, you want your numbers. Before they close the scanners, you want your numbers. But get there early and give them notice. Like, don't, like 8:15 or 8:30. View the numbers personally. Do not have it read by the poll worker. That way, if there's some confusion, if the numbers don't match with the scanner numbers, we've eliminated that possibility that maybe the numbers, maybe they gave you the wrong number, right? We want to make sure that our data is as accurate as possible. View the number personally. It is not hard to see. The first time you go, you're going to feel nervous and you're not going to know what to look for, but they're going to turn that electronic poll book. It looks just like it is a little iPad. They turn the screen towards you and it has a number on it of the number of voters who have signed in so far. And the first few times you do it, just ask them, is this the number of people who have signed in so far? And they'll say, yeah, that's the number. If it's early in the day, it'll be 0. If it's late in the day and it's been really busy, it might be like 72. If it's like at the end of early voting and there's been 10 days of early voting at a busy location, it might be 803, right? Because for early voting, they run that as one long day. They don't close the electronic poll books out each day for early voting. It's one long 10-day voting block. So you'll get used to it. Just ask them to turn the poll book towards you and check with them. Is this the number of people who have signed in at this station? Then you're going to go to the scanners. Often there's about 4 or 5 tables to check in at. So there'll be 4 or 5 electronic poll books and 4 or 5 scanners. And as soon as we're done with this, I'm going to start showing you the paperwork. So, but I just want you to understand the process. So when you get the spreadsheet, you're not going to be like, what is this spreadsheet? You know what you're looking, you know what data you're collecting, and then you're going to see the spreadsheet and you're going to go, oh, this is where that data goes. I see. This is where I put in the electronic poll book numbers. This is where I put in the scanner numbers. This is where I add them up. This is where I compare them. So it's going to make sense to you when you see the paperwork. It's all going to be very simple and straightforward. So you're going to go to the scanners after you do the poll books. Although I will say you don't have to do them in that order. If the poll books are really busy, but the scanners are open, you could go and get your scanner numbers and then rotate back and get your electronic poll books, but do them about at the same time. Don't get your electronic poll book numbers at 7 a.m. and then come back at 10 a.m. and get your scanner numbers, because those are not going to match for good reason, because a bunch of people have come through since you got your electronic poll book numbers. So you don't have to get it at like the exact minute, but generally within like a 5 or 10 minute period, get both batches of numbers. Generally try to get your electronic poll book numbers first, because that way, when you get over to the scanners, you're going to have a few less scanners, but because some people from your electronic poll books will not have scanned yet, but you won't have more. You won't have a number that looks unusual just because you've gone in the reverse direction. So generally, I would recommend poll books first, then your scanners, as close together as possible, within like 5 or 10 minutes from each other. Scanners, same thing. View the number personally. Do not have it read by the poll worker. Log both the public and the protective counter numbers. I'm going to show you these numbers and show you what they mean. If we have not been there at the opening, ask to see the opening numbers from the location log for each machine. So what that means is that if you only had time to go at the end of the night, they will have it recorded in their book what the opening numbers were, and you can write those down from their book. And then you just make note on your form that you didn't see it personally, that it was from the book. Cradle point router, remember I talked about the cradle point router? That's showing that the internet is working for the electronic poll books. Check that it's on. You peek in through this little hole and you see that there's a blue flashing light in there. Accessibility, check that the site is accessible via ramps, lifts, or elevators. Check that the accessible ballot marking device is functioning. Is it plugged in and turned on? Has a voter successfully used it? You'll need to ask the inspector if someone was able to use the accessible voting machine. This is something that we're trying to do because we work with the disability rights community, and we're really trying to help improve the way that the electronic the ballot marking devices are utilized. Unfortunately, a lot of times voters with disabilities have a hard time. The voting machine might not be plugged in, or it might not be working. And so the more that we check that those machines are working correctly, then it makes it less likely that the disability rights community can make the argument that everybody needs to vote on the ballot marking device. This is a little bit complicated maybe, but one of the reasons why the disability rights community has been pushing to make everybody vote on an electronic touchscreen ballot marking device is because the ballot marking devices historically have not been well maintained. Sometimes they haven't been set up, they haven't been turned on, they'll be left back in a corner. And then when a person with a disability comes and needs to use them, they really don't have a way to vote. And so one solution to that has come out of the disability rights community is that everybody should vote on the ballot marking device, which is not something that we're interested in because it's not as secure of a machine.
No.
So one of the ways to help make sure that we continue in New York to have both ballot marking devices and a pen and paper option is to help really improve the way that the ballot marking device is used. So that's one reason that we check. And also it's legally supposed to be functioning, and voters with disabilities have a right to vote with this machine, and we want to help them. So we do check for the accessible machines. And then at the closing of the polls, if you can, photograph or write down the results of the poll tape from each machine. Photo or video faster for everyone, so preferred. Sometimes they won't post the poll tape, in which case you just have to write down the results on a piece of paper. Sometimes I have been able to get them to give me a copy of the summary poll book report. If you have concerns about the location, you might ask for a printed list of all the voters who voted at the location. They will often print it out for you if you ask for it. How many affidavit ballots? For what reason were there affidavit ballots? How many void ballots? For what reasons? And did the voting machines or electronic poll books or other equipment break down or malfunction? I usually stay till the end of the night. I view the ballots being put in the transport bags. I watch them put the seals on both the voting machines, the ballot bags and the media packages. I observe the officer taking the ballot bags and sealed media packets to their car, and I note how many officers. I take the name and badge number, and I ask where the ballots are being transported to. And because I've done that, I've learned a lot about the process. One of the things that concerns me is that in New York, they only have to have one police officer escort the ballots. That's just not good practice. You always want to have at least two people with ballots, have them in the custody of at least two people at all times, preferably two people of opposite political parties. So that's something that I think we need to change in the law of New York. We appreciate the service of election workers and poll workers. If there are questions, please call our PAC chair, Lulu Freistadt, and that's my number. Then we were this is a poll watcher guide. This is, as I said, from the New York City Board of Elections because theirs is more specific. Poll watcher guide overview to ensure fair and honest elections. New York state law provides for appointing poll watchers to observe voting at the polls. Poll watchers are designated by candidates, political parties, or independent organizations which have candidates on the ballot and/or political committees. That's what we are. We're a political committee. The role of the poll watcher is to observe elections at the polling sites on behalf of a particular candidate, political party, or organization, and where they observe irregularities, report these observations to the elections inspector, the police officer, and/or the Board of Elections. So this is a really good point. So remember I said, like, if there's problems, just take notes. Don't make a big fuss. What you can do if you see something that's odd, and this is what you're supposed to do, you see it's in the guide, you're supposed to find an opportune moment to bring that to the attention of the election inspector. So if you add up the poll books and the ballots and they don't reconcile by a lot, you know, by like maybe 20 votes or something, if there's 20 more ballots than people who checked in, and you did them back to back right after, you know, as soon as you finish the poll books, you went to the scanners, that's odd and unusual. And you can go ahead and tell the election inspector, you know, the numbers don't look right here. I've counted the number of people who voted and I counted the number of scanners and they're not matching. And so that way, not that they're going to do anything about it, probably they're going to give you some excuse, but you've at least made note. You've reported it to the election inspector because that's what you're instructed to do. And even if they don't do anything about it, you take note. You reported it to the election inspector. You get their name, their title, and note that you did tell them and note their response. So we are instructed to let them know if we see something that is amiss. You must be a qualified voter. Here it says the city of New York because that's where this is from, but you must be a qualified voter in the county where you're observing. So that means you have to be registered and it has to be in your county. Poll watchers must be certified in writing by a candidate or a chairperson of a political committee or independent body and must present a certificate for each election district to the elections inspector for that election district. Remember I told you that? They must present a certificate for each election district. That means if you're in an early polling place and there are 15 election districts there, you're going to have to give them 15 pieces of paper that have you as the poll watcher for each of those election districts. Separate pieces of paper. I'm sorry. I hate to see paper go to waste like that, but they're sticklers enough about it that I used to try to, like, you know, write all 15 on one piece of paper. It's just sometimes you get away with it and sometimes you don't. So now I print them all out. Number of poll watchers. You can have 3 poll watchers per election district at any one time from each candidate. I think it's highly unlikely that we're going to go over this, so I wouldn't be too worried about it. Only one of these watchers may be within the guardrail. So now what's the guardrail? The guardrail is a really old-fashioned term from the old days when there was a rail there where voters voted behind, but it's sort of like a metaphorical space now, which means like kind of in the busy part of the like polling location, like where they're bagging up these flash drives or where they're sealing the ballots or where they're posting the poll tapes, kind of like in the center of the action is what it means now. So if you actually wind up with 3 poll watchers from one candidate, only one of you can kind of be in the center of the action there. But I've never had them be sticklers about this. In my opinion, they don't really care. So just be aware that it is technically a rule. Here, few if any polling places actually have guardrails. The phrase refers to the portion of the poll site containing the table used by the election inspectors and Board of Elections equipment, including the privacy booths, ballot marking devices, and scanners used to conduct such elections, and any areas used by voters within the poll site to move between such locations. So, like I said, kind of the center of the action. The poll watcher may arrive at 5 a.m. before unlocking an examination of any voting machine to verify no votes have been cast and that the ballot boxes and ballot liner case are empty. You can ask to see that the ballot boxes are empty. And you can also check that the drop boxes are empty if there are drop boxes on site. You can examine the poll books as long as they don't interfere with inspectors or election proceedings. Observe the closing of the polls and the canvas. The canvas is usually at a separate location. They don't, I mean, they canvass multiple times. So I think here what they're referring to is kind of when they're putting all of those poll tapes and everything into the packets at the end of the night. Challenge individual voters on the basis of signature authenticity, residence, multiple voting, qualification to vote, electioneering. So this particular item I am double checking on. I know that there was legislation to make it harder to challenge an individual voter. I'm going to try to find out what the latest statute is on that. I actually would not encourage you to engage in this. I don't think that this is that individual voters at the polling location is really the heart of the matter. If there are problems with the voter rolls, I personally believe it's a much broader problem with, as somebody said, an algorithm or something like that. And if you start challenging individual voters, what it is going to do is create a feeling of antagonism and hostility there at the polling location. And it's going to make it harder for you to do your other poll watching jobs. So I would not encourage you to engage in this. I don't think it's useful, and I think it can be detrimental.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Poll watcher limitations. These are the things that I've talked to you about. You cannot electioneer. You cannot wear anything that has any candidate or, any saying on it. I think there's even been poll watchers that were turned away because they had Black Lives Matter t-shirts on. So neutral, 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 polite, professional, neutral, no electioneering. That includes soliciting votes or distributing, wearing, or carrying political literature. Don't wear a hat with your candidate or Trump or Biden. No posters, banners, or buttons, or displaying refreshments. You cannot also give food or water to voters in line. I'm not thinking that you would, but just so you know, that's against New York statutes. Don't give anybody a bottle of water, even if they seem to be really in need of it. It's illegal. Don't tamper with election materials, obviously, interfere with the election process, protest a vote ruling, accompany a voter to the privacy booth or scanner. I told you about that. If you see a violation, poll watchers are not law enforcement officers. However, they may attempt to enforce their candidates' rights by reporting a violation to the election inspector, poll site coordinators, or the police officer on duty, or the Board of Elections. Okay, remember, this is what I talked about a few minutes ago. You can report if you see a problem. Then these are the actual statutes. This is from section 8-500 of the law. Watchers, at any general, special, town, or village election, any party committee or any independent body whose candidate are upon the ballot, and any political committee, that's us, supporting or opposing a ballot proposal, that's how we normally authorize our poll watchers, may have for each election district 3 watchers. This is what it's going to be this time. It's at a primary election. At any primary election, any party committee, that means the Republican Party Committee or the Democratic Party Committee or the Libertarian or Green Party or any candidate on the ballot may have for each election district 3 watchers. Watchers shall be appointed by the chair or other officer of any such party committee. So we'll be working to get your certificates from them. And then you can come at least 15 minutes before the unlocking of the polls and until after the signing of the inspector's returns and the proclamation of the results. So you can look those over in more detail. We'll be emailing these to everybody who's on the list. And this was just an email from Douglas Kellner saying that we were all set. So we don't need to look at that. So I know I saw people with their hands up, but I'm just going to push through because I want to make sure that we get to the paperwork. Is there urgent questions, Walter, Paul?
I was wondering, can you do any recording or taking pictures? Because I think that some people would not feel comfortable at the workers there if you would take pictures.
You cannot. While the polls are open, you cannot photograph or video. It is specifically prohibited in New York State. After the polls close, they will usually let you take a photograph of the poll tape after the polls close. Well,
In Erie County, they leave the ballots in the machines overnight.
yeah, at the end of the election day.
Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you. I wouldn't call it best practices.
No.
They'd send the flash. They probably send the flash drives down to the Board of Elections, though, right?
Yeah, we take the flash drives down to the town hall and drop them off in the parking lot behind the building. Somebody's there to collect them in the parking lot.
I know. You're going to just write it all down in your reports. What I'm hoping is that after you do your poll observations, you're going to write a report, not a long report, maybe, a few sentences or a page, whatever you feel like. And you can note things that you think went well, things that you know, were well done, well administered, and you can also include things that you had concerns about or that you felt were a disaster even. So you'll make your report, and we hope to publish all of those reports and make these available to the public, so that this is a great way for the public to learn more about our election process. So a lot of this is about informing ourselves and informing the public. Joe?
Can we be poll observers at the same districts that we voted?
Yeah, no problem. Okay,
Who gets these reports?
I'm going to show you these paperwork now. So do you remember I told you, since we went all through that, when we see the paperwork, it is going to totally make sense to you. So there's 2 sheets. This is page 1. This is very straightforward. This is our voter scanner reconciliation for the 2024 primary election. It is from us, Smart Legislation. We are a nonpartisan project dedicated to improving our elections through legislation. Confidence is our political action committee to monitor, protect, and verify election results. You're going to put the location name. You're going to do a separate one of these for each location that you go to. Don't put them all on one sheet. It will be very confusing. So I'm going to email you these, and you're going to print them out. It doesn't have to be in color. You can print in black and white, but sometimes the color does help to sort of like keep it clear. It keeps the sections a little bit more separate and distinct. So this is a 2-page, and it is set up. It's an Excel sheet, but if you print it landscape, it should print correctly onto 2 pieces of paper or 1 2-sided piece of paper. Your location name, the address of the location. This is not your address. This is the location address, the date, your name, and your certificate from Confidence PAC. You don't have to put anything there. This is where you're going to go to the electronic poll book table. You're going to put the date and the time up here. So at the start, well, you've got your date up here. You're going to put the time. So if you go at 5:45 a.m., God bless you. God bless you. God bless your families that help you do this work.
Nice.
You're
Nice.
okay, I'm going to mute you. I'm sorry. We need to keep moving through this. We're trying to get done by 8:30. So at the start of the day, then you're going to go to table number 1, and you're going to write down the number of voters who have signed in. At the start of the day, it's going to be 0, I hope. So that's going to be 0. You're going to be filling this in with a pen. I'm going to fill it out with my with my computer right now, but you're going to be there with a pen. You're going to go to each electronic poll book, and there, I hope, at 5:45 a.m. are going to be 0 votes recorded on those. Probably there's just 4 tables. If you're at a huge station like early voting, there might be 8 tables. At Barclays Center, there's a lot. Then you're going to go to the scanner, and there's 2 counters on the scanner. There is a public counter and there is a protective counter. Do not get confused about this. It is not that complicated. The public counter counts the number of pages that were scanned that election. So since that machine was turned on, like for early voting, it'll be for the whole early voting period, or for election day, it'll be election day. If it's a 2-page ballot, it's going to scan 2 for each voter. So the public counter, I'm pretty sure we have to double check this, because sometimes you're going to have 2-page ballots, and it's a little bit different. But usually it counts 2 pages. So that means if you have like 1 voter, you'd have 2 on the public counter, or if you had 4 signed in on the poll books, then you would have 8 on the public counter. If it's a 2-page ballot, I think it's highly unlikely that it's going to be a 2-page ballot. It's a primary. There's like 3 people on the ballot, like for the Republican primary. I think I looked, and it looked like everybody's still on there. Trump and Vivek Ramaswamy and Haley, I think they're all still on there, but I think it's all 1 page. So most likely this is going to match exactly. And when you start the day, your public counter on scanner A should be 0, scanner B 0, scanner C 0, scanner D 0. There's probably 4 scanners. Could be, different. If it's a small polling place like Paul's, I think they had 2 scanners. So then when you're going to come back at your second check-in, so now maybe you know, 25 voters checked in here, 20 voters checked in here at this table. This district, hardly anybody came. It was 10 voters. And this district had a bunch of people and there were 50. It was a busy district. Okay, now you're going to add those up. You go over here, the total number of voters, that's 50, 60, 80, 105. You got 105 voters there. Now you're going to go down here to your scanner and you can, if you do a midday, you might have to add some lines here, but let's just, so say this is middle of the day, just to correspond to what we did up top. So say you go to scanner A, and a lot of times at the scanners, they direct people, and I found there'll be an even number. So it might be like 25 on scanner A, 25 on scanner B, 25 on scanner C, and maybe there's going to be 30 over here on scanner D, and you're going to add those up. So that's 75, 105, I hope. That's going to match. And then you're going to take your number up here from the poll books and you're going to pull it down here, and that's 105, and they match. You have the same number of voters as ballots that were scanned in, and the difference is 0. And that is a perfect card. You're going to come back at the end of the day and do the same thing. Now your protective counter is like an odometer. The protective counter tells all of the ballots that have been scanned since that voting machine had like the start of its voting life. So the protective counter is going to be a lot higher. And when you come in at the start of the day, it might be like 4,500. And when you get to the end of the day, if there were 25 ballots scanned, then at the end of the day, it would be 4,525. You see, because 25 got scanned. And so it started with 4,500, and at the end of the day, it was 4,525. So then you'd say, what's your expected protective counter count? Well, it was 25 ballots got scanned. So we expected it to be 4,525. And was it? Yep. And so the difference is 0. And that's what we want to see. And you'll fill that out for each one. Now I'm going to show you some actual, I want to show you some actual forms, and then take some questions. So also here are some of the other things that I said that you could check. Accessibility. Is the site accessible? Yes or no? You can put an X there if it is. And then, is the ballot marking device plugged in, turned on? Has the voter used it? Hopefully all of those things are yes. The poll tapes, were they posted, and did you take a photo or video? I think we might have to do poll tapes on Wednesday. The list of voters, if you have any concerns about the location, you can ask for the list of voters. If you have no concerns, I wouldn't bother asking for it. How many affidavit ballots? Maybe there were 5. For what reason? You know, you can just write in here. A lot of times people like the affidavits are because didn't receive their absentee ballot. That's often why it is. How many voters polled ballots? You know, maybe there's 6. Did the voting machines, electronic poll books, or other equipment break down or malfunction? Maybe they did. You know, if you ask them, did you have any problems? And they say, yeah, the electronic poll books were kind of spotty and went in and out. So you could say that, you know, poll books had lost connection sometimes. Sorry, this is just because it's a spreadsheet that it's doing this. You'll be writing this in by hand, so you won't have this problem. Were all the seals properly placed on the voting machines, ballots, and media? I certainly hope so. Were the ballots transported? Well, you know, you heard Walt say in Erie County, they don't. By an officer, name and badge number, and how many officers escorted the ballots. Usually it's just 1. So now let me just pull up some actual paperwork and show you what it looks like when it works and what it works like when you have a polling station where the numbers don't add up, because you're going to want to know both of those. So here,
Sweetie girl, I love you. You're so beautiful.
I'm going to go ahead and just mute everybody again. Okay, so this is the infamous 2021 polling location here in Brooklyn that kind of really concerned us. This is the very first time that we did this poll watching. So this is me. I went to FDR High School here in Brooklyn, and I went to the polling tables, and this is the end of the night, and they were, boy, hell bent on getting out of there. It was very hard, and they were already like really kind of riled up and sort of rude and mean. So this one, they wouldn't show me the poll book myself, but they told me that there were 131 voters checked in there. These first, I saw the numbers myself, 128, 77, 66, and 78. And I added all those up and I got 480. And then I went over to the scanners and I saw the number myself. I just did the public counter. I didn't worry about too much else because, like I said, they were super trying to get out of there. And I wrote down scanner A, 240, scanner B, 239, 242 for scanner C, 227 for scanner D, and 230 for scanner E. And I added those up and it was 1,178 with a difference of 698 more ballots than voters who had checked in. I was so upset. I was like, that is just bizarre. And I told the election inspector that there was a problem, and oh, did they get mad. They were yelling and screaming at me to get out of there. It was very weird and strange. We've been back to that poll site many times since then, and we've never found any problems after that. But we did 4 public records requests to the Board of Elections, and they were never able to explain it. They refused actually to respond to our public records requests. Now I'm going to show you one that looks normal. This is what I hope yours are going to look like. I think I had one set up for you. Schweck. Oh yeah, here we go. Okay, it's on a PDF, so I didn't recognize that. Okay, so this is a little messy, but yours are probably gonna, you make them as neat as you can, but you're there doing it live with a pen or pencil. So I do my best. So this was a different location, a different year. This was the next year in Bushwick campus. And I went to the first table. You can see all my stuff is signed in here, the location of the polling place. My candidate, in this case, Paperboy Love Prince, was a candidate who gave us our certificates because this again was a primary and we needed a candidate. I went to the tables. I'm going to blow this up a little bit. It's kind of small. Can you see that a little better? Okay, so table 1, I put the districts in up here actually. These are the districts 228, 223, 234, and 647. You can put those districts in if you want. And then I think I mislabeled that as serial number. I'm pretty sure those are the districts. But here I put in the count 72, 58, 35, and 33. Those are the voters who had checked in up to that point. It was 4:50 p.m. It was right about before closing. It was on an early voting day. I think it was the last day of early voting, and they closed at 5 p.m. And I got 198 total votes. And then I went over here to the scanner at the end of the day. Scanner A 50, scanner B 50, scanner C 49, scanner D 49, and I added those up, and there was 198 ballots on the scanners. And then I brought the number of voters down here to this column 198, and there's a 0 difference, and that is exactly correct, and that is exactly what we want to see, and that is what we were hoping for. And Rose Malcolm was the coordinator. I put her name down here, and then I also filled out the other information, but I don't think I have it on this form to show you. So that's 8:30, so that's as much as we can do tonight. We are going to continue the training on Wednesday. That's why we set up 2 trainings, is because it's kind of a lot of material. So we can email you all of these forms between now and Wednesday, and you can take a look at them. And I have time for just maybe one question before 8:30. Is there one important question? Somebody, Joe, do you have a question?
He's muted.
There we go. Had trouble unmuting. When you send us these documents, will they be sent to us as a PDF or will they be sent to us as in the Excel format?
We could do both, actually.
Because what
There-
I'm thinking is it would be neater if we could just, if I could take my handwritten report that was written in with a lot of speed and sloppiness and bring it back and put it into the sheet in Excel.
Yeah, I do that sometimes too. So, yeah, we'll send you both. Okay, so that's our training for tonight. I hope that I really appreciate everybody being here and your wonderful attitude and smiling faces and your enthusiasm to improve our elections. And we're gonna meet back here Wednesday at 7 p.m. and that's going to be a lot of time for you to ask questions. And we're also going to go over the poll tapes, how to take photos of the poll tapes, and I'll try to have a demonstration. So if you want to use that app, Democracy Counts, that helps you just take a video, we'll go over that on Wednesday also. So what I will do, I'm going to stop the recording now, and anybody who wants to stay on for a